All right, let's just jump right in. What if our farms could act less like, factories and more like actual forests? That's really the core idea behind agroforestry, and it's this powerful nature-based strategy that could totally regenerate our soils, boost biodiversity, and build food systems that are genuinely resilient.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get into this whole idea of a multi-story farm and the science that makes it work. Then we'll check out some real-world designs, see what happens when you bring animals into the mix, which really changes the game, and we'll even look at some ancient farming wisdom before we wrap things up with a roadmap for the future.
All right, first things first, what is agroforestry? Really? Well, it's all about a shift in how we see things. Imagine moving from a flat, single-crop factory floor to a vibrant, multi-layered ecosystem, just packed with life and all these cool interactions.
When you get right down to it, the definition is actually pretty simple. It's the intentional, and that word is key, integration of trees, crops, and maybe even livestock, all on the same landscape. And the goal here? It's not just about what you can harvest this year. It's about creating a whole system that's strong, that can take care of itself, and is way more productive over the long haul.
And that leads right into this amazing idea of trees as biological anchors. I love that phrase. They're not just there, passively hanging out. No, they are active players in this whole game. They do way more than just give us timber or fruit. They're literally stabilizing the entire ecosystem right from the soil up. Now, this isn't just some nice, fluffy idea, right? It's grounded in some really powerful science, some deep ecological principles. So the big question is, how does this alliance between trees and crops, how does it actually work? Well, it really boils down to two key concepts, complementarity and facilitation. Okay, think of it like building a championship sports team. Complementarity is when you have players with different skills. One plant has deep roots, another has shallow roots, so they're not competing for the same stuff. And facilitation? That's when one player actively helps another one out, like a big tall tree providing shade for a smaller, more sensitive crop underneath. So you see, they're not just living side by side, they're actively cooperating.
And here's a perfect example of that facilitation in action. The nutrient pump. This is so cool. Trees, with their super deep roots, can reach way down into the subsoil to grab water and minerals that smaller crops could never get to. It's like they're mining for treasure. Then they pull those nutrients all the way up into their leaves. And when those leaves eventually fall and decompose, bam, they enrich the topsoil, making all those deep down nutrients available for everyone else. It's like the perfect natural recycling system.
And get this, some of these trees can literally make their own fertilizer. It's wild. There are certain species that can pull nitrogen, which is, super important for plant growth, right out of the atmosphere. A special enzyme inside them converts it into ammonium, which is a form plants can actually use. So they are basically fertilizing the soil for free. And we're talking about a lot here, up to 200 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare every single year. I mean, that's just incredible.
Okay, so that's the science, the theory behind it all. But what does this stuff actually look like out in the real world? Let's get practical and check out 3 common blueprints for putting agroforestry into practice. So 3 of the most common designs you're going to see are, first, alley cropping. That's basically rows of trees with crops growing in the alleys in between. Then you have windbreaks, which are these long lines of trees planted to protect the fields. And finally, live fences, which are, well, they're exactly what they sound like. Fences made out of living plants.
Let's zoom in on windbreaks for a second. By planting these rows of trees, like casuarina, a farmer can create a protective microclimate. It's like creating a little safe bubble for the crops. It shields them from those harsh, drying winds, which means way less water is lost from the soil and the plants themselves. And that protection, that alone, can be a total game changer.
So what's the payoff? I mean, how much of a difference does it really make? Well, a well-designed windbreak can boost crop yields by up to 25%. Think about that. That's a huge return for what is really a simple, elegant solution.
And it gets better, because the benefits go way beyond just the farm itself. We're talking about a global impact here. On average, these systems are pulling somewhere between 2 and 4 tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere per hectare every single year. So they're actively fighting climate change. Okay, so far we've focused on trees and crops, but what happens when you introduce a third major player into the mix? Let's talk about silvopasture. This is where we intentionally bring animals into the agroforestry system.
And wow, the difference between this and a conventional, wide-open pasture is just night and day.
In a typical pasture, you often get soil erosion, heat-stressed animals, and a ton of water runoff. But with silvopasture, the tree roots anchor the soil, the canopy gives a ton of protective shade, and the whole system acts like a giant sponge, soaking up way more water. We're talking up to a 30% increase in infiltration. It just solves so many problems all at once.
And take a look at these numbers. Remember that 2 to 4 tons of carbon sequestration we mentioned? Well, when you bring livestock into the system the right way, that number can shoot way up. We're looking at an average of around 5.5 tons. But some systems can sequester even more. That's because the animals, with their grazing and manure, they just kick the whole nutrient cycle into overdrive and help build up that crucial soil carbon even faster.
Now, you might be thinking this all sounds like some brand new, cutting-edge idea. But the truth is, this is ancient wisdom. We're talking about time-tested traditions. South Asia, in particular, has this incredibly rich history of sophisticated agroforestry systems that have been working perfectly for centuries.
And you can just see a glimpse of that incredible diversity right here. You've got the super complex home gardens in places like Sri Lanka and India with all these different canopy layers. Then there are the Taungya systems in Myanmar, which brilliantly makes forest trees with food crops. And check out the Gher systems in Bangladesh. They masterfully combine fish ponds with fruit trees. I mean, each one of these is just a masterclass in ecological design.
Let's just focus on one of these for a moment, the Kandyan Home Garden in Sri Lanka. This thing is a globally recognized model. Seriously, we are talking about over 100 different species all packed into a small area, giving people everything from food and spices to medicine. And get this, carbon number. These systems can store up to 50 tons of carbon per hectare. It is a powerful, living example of what is truly possible.
So, where do we go from here? What does all this mean for the future? Well, that brings us to our final thought, the path forward. You see, agroforestry isn't just a collection of farming techniques. It's much bigger than that. It's a roadmap to a completely different kind of economy, a biological economy built on harmony.
Ultimately, what it represents is a fundamental shift in mindset. It's about moving away from an extractive mentality and toward one of stewardship. When we put trees back into our farms, we're not just thinking about this year's harvest. We're becoming stewards of a living foundation, one that will nourish generations and generations to come.
It's a profound shift for sure, but it's one that can start small. Which leaves us with one final thought to reflect on.